My favorite memory of nature, I think, was just sitting by the river when I was a child. We'd often catch little tiddler fish, tiddlers we called them, so sticklebacks. And it would be with a net in a big glass sweet jar. We'd catch them, watch them for a bit, and then release them. And I loved it. And it was just time stopped and everything. You were aware of the natural world around you. You know, it wasn't really about catching the fish. It was everything. Yeah. I mean, I think I was 8, 9, 10. I don't think I'd let my children do that when I was that age, which is interesting. Yeah, and I'd just go walk the dog or just go and walk down to the river. Um, I'd go in it, paddle. It was very shallow. It was quite a safe river. Yeah, so it was just home. It just brought things to me, I think. And it was constantly moving, but at the same time, it felt very still and peaceful. Yeah. I can't honestly remember a time when I wasn't. And I know that sounds funny, but I remember being, really little, 8, 9, 10, and I had my own little wildlife club. I started it and I was the only member. And I know that there are other um, nature writers that did a very similar thing. And I wish we could have all joined together. Melissa Harrison, I know, did the same thing, a nature writer, brilliant nature writer. And she did the same thing. So I had this little club of one. And in it was how we save nature. And I was 8, 9, so I was aware that something was very wrong in the world then. My local river that I'd go and I used to watch water voles go up and down the river, and there were loads of them. I mean, it's astonishing, really, and I love to watch them. But what I really wanted to see was otters, and then there were no otters in for a long way around. There were no otters on that river. Um, but now, if you go back to that river, you can't see water voles. You might see an otter, but it's just this whole, I don't know. I think I must have been aware of it at that age. So yeah, that's when the protesting sort of started in a small way. What made me start writing? I wrote a lot as a child. I think growing up in that time, sort of 70s, 80s, you know, there wasn't an awful lot else to do apart from be out in the natural world or play with your friends. But I was quite an insular child. I loved my books, I loved reading. Um, and I think writing just became a natural extension of that. So I wrote stories, always featuring animals, quite often horses. But yeah, always animals. So I was always doing it. And then teenage years, growing up, A levels, I tried to, well, I would have liked to have gone to university at that age, and I kind of didn't manage it. I managed it at a later age. But in those years in between, I wrote and I wrote, and I think that's when I decided I wanted to be a writer. Um, but it wasn't until there was a key moment at an environmental protest I was on at the time, road protests of the 90s. And there was an interviewer. I've told this story a few times actually, but it really resonates still. And there was an interviewer there with a microphone, and I queued up waiting to speak to them about the protest I was on, about why this road shouldn't go ahead, about what it was going to destroy. And got to my turn, and he put the microphone under my nose, and I just kind of went, and nothing came out. I just utterly froze, completely froze. Um, and I just kind of, trotted away, um, went home, bawled my eyes out because I thought that was my moment to save the world. I had a good cry, and then I picked up my pen and I wrote and I wrote, and I've not stopped since. And I've got a bit more confidence and through that, I think. But it was the writing that seemed to me to be everything. You had time to reflect and really think about what you were going to say, which you don't often have when you're speaking. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, I was away. I think go with your heart and own your voice. And that's a really hard thing to do. And I think it's taken me a very long time to realize that. But you have a unique voice of your own. Nobody else will have that voice. Um, so own it, be proud of that. This imposter syndrome that we all get. A little tiny bit of that is good because it kind of makes you go back and go, okay, is this what I really mean? But the rest of it is rubbish. You if you write, you are a writer. And I think it's not necessary to know everything. Your thoughts, your experiences, your line of inquiry is the important thing. And I think writing is a form of discovery as well. So I think just getting things down, your thoughts, you can go back and you can find things out. But yeah, so I think that finding your voice. And I find I've never had writer's block. I get, what would I call it? I get writer's distraction and I get, and I get a lot of, oh, I think I need to do something else. So actually sitting with my bottom on a seat writing is quite hard. But if I'm feeling I've got a task ahead of me and I don't know how to start, I don't know what I want to say, I go for a walk, or I read some poetry. Poetry I love. It's just, it makes different connections, I think, in your head with what you're already thinking. It's such an organic thing to read poetry. Um, but yeah, and the going for a walk. That's sort of, I think there's something about the rhythm of walking that is very similar to the rhythm of writing in a way. Yeah, and don't let anyone put you off. The idea behind World Service is what does a right to roam mean? But it goes beyond that. It goes deeper into connection with nature, why we need that access to nature, why we haven't got it. And it's 13 individual responses on what that means to people. My section, my essay is about community, um, which is the heart of everything for me. And community can mean an awful lot of different things, but the power of a community to connect and change things is very underestimated. But when it happens, I think you feel this extraordinary strength. And I spoke about a couple of examples in the book, because I feel that, especially, so I live very rurally. Um, I'm very much of the sort of rural working area. We've never been very well off. We don't own anything here. We don't own our own house. It's a tenanted house. And our village is very scattered. We get quite a few people coming and going, moving in, holiday homes, that sort of thing. So it's kind of, how do you form a community with people from all sorts of different walks of life? And I think access to nature and the idea of care for nature is an incredible way in. It's a real gateway to community, and then the community serves nature, and you've all come together to do that. Okay, so just going to read a little bit from my essay for World Service. And again, it's about how community can come together for nature, primarily to benefit nature, but of course we have benefits too. My small town of Hungerford is a far friendlier environment for hedgehogs to live in than the chemically soaked, slug-pelleted, strimmed, flailed and mown hedgerows and fields of this rural landscape. With holes punched through garden fences, they can travel across boundaries, meet and feed, and are loved by their human neighbours. The town is also becoming one of a growing number of swift towns. Swifts are extraordinary birds that only touch the earth when they found a building to nest in and spend years in the air. They make exciting fairground screaming, Wurlitzer flights above our high street, schools, churches, common and water meadows. They are thrilling, fascinating, but fast diminishing, because they share our buildings and insect-raising spaces. And we've forgotten that, or never acknowledged the importance of that. So now we cheer and marvel at them, find out about them, love them, and before we know it, have the beginnings of saving them, because they have been coming to our town all the way from Africa each year since it was built, and it's a very old town. Swifts are gateway birds to community. Chemicals are dispensed with, wildflowers left to grow, geography lessons created around them, poems read and written, and nest boxes built in workshops. Everybody wins in a Swift town, and their reach extends beyond twinning towns to a global community of care. So if people could only take one key message from my essay, it would be agency. I think you have the agency to make a change, to make a difference. By being in a place, it doesn't matter where you've come from, how long you've been there, you're in that place, you are part of that community, you are part of the nature community. And it goes back to this having a voice, doesn't it? You have agency to do something to make a change. And it might not feel that you can, it might be that you need to reach out to others. But I think we can all start small and build. I think if you see that something isn't right, then try and make a stand, try and make a change. I spoke about hedgehogs in the essay, just a quick mention of hedgehogs, but somebody put up a notice in the town to sort of say, watch out, little sign to say, watch out, car drivers, there are hedgehogs here. And what that did was start a whole conversation with people. Oh, you've got hedgehogs. We've got hedgehogs too. And down at number 92, they've got hedgehogs in their garden. Before you know it, people are knocking holes in their fences. The hedgehogs can get through into the next garden. You've got neighbours talking to each other. And you've got a hedgehog town as well as a swift town. And you've got people saying, you've got children at school going, we're in an environmental club. We've got an eco club at school. Miss is saying, it's me, Miss is saying, please don't put slug pellets down in your garden because the hedgehogs eat them, eat the slugs that have eaten the pellets and they die. So then you've got grandparents and elderly neighbours that have always used slug pellets going, oh, okay, I'm not going to use slug pellets anymore. And on it goes and on it goes, So I think just with somebody putting out a sign saying, please don't run over the hedgehogs, watch out for hedgehogs. You've got a whole community built up around them. Yeah. I'm thrilled and really privileged to be a judge on the new Climate Fiction Prize. It's a prize that is open to authors that have written a book roughly this year, and all the submission details are on their website. But it's a cry, it's a clarion call really to fiction writers that are writing about how the climate catastrophe, the climate crisis is affecting us in so many different ways. And what the prize aims to do is, it all sounds a bit doomerism, and it isn't at all. It's about extending that reach so that people are reading about what the future might be like, what the climate we are living in, the challenges, how that affects characters and plot, narrative in a book, what that does to society, to a community, families. But importantly, how does that drive change and resilience and hope? So it's a broadening of that reach of storytelling. Storytelling is a hugely powerful thing. It's part of being human. We are made of stories. We've all got stories within us. And this is a way of raising that climate change voice. And I think in the past, climate fiction has been about dystopian fiction or science fiction. And of course, it still can be, but it can also be, you could have a real life drama, you could have a mystery, you could have crime. Margaret Atwood said that it's not climate change, it's everything change. And this is what we're going to be dealing with. And I think fiction can empower us to see ourselves in a character and hopefully to be able to act. It's a kind of imagination activism, if that makes sense. If we can imagine living in this future that's coming and how we might act, it's a great way of preparing us, of imagining how other people can cope, being kinder, and making the change for the better as well, making changes for the better. Yeah, so I'm thrilled to be part of that. I've got a lot of reading to do, and I'm really excited about it. We were able to launch it at Hay in front of an audience that were fantastically engaging, and it was a really moving experience actually, because I think we were all there asking ourselves what storytelling can do in the face of something as enormous as climate change. What just people telling stories and people reading books, but actually it's an enormous force. There's a book I read as a child called Watership Down, and ostensibly it's a book about rabbits. It's a children's story about rabbits, but it's also climate fiction. And this book was written in the 1970s, and I read it as a very young child. It's quite a tough read, but it has a hopeful ending, it has a good ending. But as I revisited that book as I got older, and a film was made about it, that's traumatized a whole generation of people because it is a really difficult book as well. But as I got older and as I reread the book, and I saw a play about it at our local theatre, because the author Richard Adams is actually local. And that's another way the book means so much to me, because it is a local book. I've lived in almost every chapter where it's set. And the story begins with the rabbits sensing danger, and there's a big sign going up at their warren, and there's going to be a big housing development. Now, this is actually set in a very real place where I went to school. And there's a huge irony that this place now, which is still fields next to my old secondary school, is being built on again. So it's kind of, I don't know, art imitating life, imitating art. It's just this bizarre circle. But as I was saying, as I got older, I realized that this story about rabbits is actually about environmental destruction and how it impacts on people. It's about refugees and a dangerous journey. It's about an odyssey to a safe place, which they do make. And that's not a spoiler. But also, the rabbit is described in the book, that the king of the rabbits is called the Prince of 1,000 Enemies. So what you've got with a rabbit is the lowest rung of society in a way, that the most vulnerable rung of a society, not the lowest, of course, because a rabbit, of course, has so many predators, there are so many dangers. And it really struck me that, yeah, this is climate fiction. This is talking about environmental damage, refugees, and those people that are least causing the climate crisis are most affected by it, which I found was hugely moving. Yeah. So anyway, it will be really interesting to see what books come out of this. I think the idea of storytelling, I've always thought that writing is an act of resistance. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. I think you have to have the non-fiction, you have to have the science and the scientific writing, and creative non-fiction tells a story too. That also is storytelling. and it can be a very powerful thing. But something like fiction is very different. I think it has a further reach because other people might pick it up and read it that weren't deliberately going for writing about the loss of nature or writing about the climate crisis. They might be just picking up a book about a family breakdown or a family makeup, or they might be reading what might be a love story, but if it's got a background and an inciting element of what climate change brings to that, you've got it in there. It kind of gets in. Storytelling is a thread, so like a wisp of threads that kind of make this yarn that go all the way through. I love the interplay of yarn being this twist of threads, but also a story. So I think nonfiction and fiction each have their place, and I think they complement each other. And it's hard to say what has the biggest impact, actually. And I'm not sure I know, other than that you need both. So the connections between nature conservation and the climate crisis, it's a really interesting one because, of course, they're absolutely interconnected. They're caused by so many of the same things. But for a long time, I felt I was fighting my little corner for nature, for farmland birds in particular, because it's where I am, it's what I see. Um, and I knew, of course, that there's the parallel, as I saw it, climate crisis going alongside. And I thought, well, I'm just doing this bit. I'm trying to raise awareness about the loss of biodiversity. And there are other people doing this, the climate crisis stuff. But it's absolutely one of the same, it's the same thing. It's the planet that we share. We are part of nature. Um, Going back actually to Jessie Greengrass's book, The High House, her character notices that the swallows that come back from Africa, a bit about like the swifts that do that as well, coming back from Africa each year, and living in our buildings, on our buildings. And she's noticing fewer and fewer coming back each year until they stop altogether. And it really struck me because that's what we're seeing now. That's a sign and a symptom of the climate catastrophe and what we're doing to the planet that we share. There was a recent report from the British Trust for Ornithology, the breeding bird survey, that said that swift swallows and house martins, so three species of birds that migrate each year from Africa, they come over here and they live in our barns, our buildings, on the sides of our house, in our urban settings, as well as the countryside. And they have declined by 40% in 10 years. And that is on top of a massive decline already. So I'm thinking in 10 or 12 years, if we keep on this trajectory, they'll be gone. These familiar birds that we have swooping around our houses, that live in our own homes and houses, in the little cracks and things, they'll be gone. They'll be a rare thing. How can we let that happen? But what connects it with the climate catastrophe for me is actually a poem by Ted Hughes about swifts. And again, I read this, I think, at school in the 80s when I first came across it. And he recalls the swifts coming back, and he says something along the lines of, they're back again, the globe is still working, which is a wonderful line, gives me shivers, gives me goosebumps. But of course, they're not coming back. They've stopped coming back. The globe is not working, and that affects nature, affects us. We're all in this together. But we have the power to stop this, and we have the power to change this. So I no longer see it as two parallel threads, that I'm dealing with this at the moment, so I can't deal with this. It's all one thing, and we have to do whatever we can, and it might seem like there are small things, but we have to do whatever we can to come together and fight this with joy as well as the grief and despair, because that's important. What's my happy place in nature? Oh, I think I have different places in each season. I love all of the seasons, and I always say whatever season I'm in, I say it's my favorite. Um, but I think I love the chalk grasslands, the chalk downs, which are the hills above my house here. Um, I love that. I love just being there. They're in the spring and summer now. They're full of chalkgrass and herbs, so they just smell intoxicating. It's like you're in a herb garden. And if you lie back, you've got an anthill for a pillow, and it's covered in. That sounds very itchy, but it's not, because they're covered in wild thyme, and it's a while before the ants realise you're there, and then they'll come out and nip you, and you have to move on. But but for a while, it's just paradise, and the butterflies and the birds around you. That's my happy place. But it will be different, in the autumn. I tend to seek the woods more, and a good kick through the leaves. It's just in the autumnal smells. Yeah. Trees, grasslands. Yeah. Oh gosh, I think I'm going to say birdsong, because it's something that no matter where you are, it has the power to stop you in your tracks. Um, it's the most beautiful thing, isn't it? I mean, and not all birds. I mean, I've got we've got rather it's a bit of a scruffy house actually, on the outside, but we've grown. I've covered the brickwork over the years with climbing jasmine, and there's a bit of ivy in there. But what it does is it supports a whole family of sparrows, of house sparrows. I don't know whether you can hear them chirping away, um, and it's just the happiest sound. And when I hear that, I know I'm home. Um, and the very fact that those little climbing trees are climbing up the house. That's a habitat for them. If somebody came and cut that down, those sparrows would be gone. So that sound, that simple sort of cheepy chirpy sound is home, but it's also I put that there, and they came, they're living on the house. I've had to put nest boxes up. And then when they started, they're quite violent sparrows. When they started chucking each other out of the boxes and arguing over them, we put up more boxes. So yeah, that's really important.